Hello, I'm Tom Turner and I'm going to talk about the Knepp Rewilding project. The video is in 3 parts. First, I'll outline the history and geography of the Knepp estate. Second, I'll discuss the rewilding project that made Knepp famous. And third, I'll finish with a list of points about what we can learn from Knepp with regard to the future of British agriculture and to the management of greenbelt land. Let's start with Knepp's geology. The estate rests on a sedimentary formation dating from the Carboniferous period, which ended 300 million years ago. Its surface geology is Wealden clay, laid down about 100 million years ago in lagoon conditions. The clay is described as being like concrete in summer and like sticky porridge in winter. The owners describe it as marginal land for agriculture, and its agricultural land classification is 3B, indicating that it is capable of producing moderate yields of a narrow range of crops, principally cereals and grass. The vegetation of Knepp was tundra during the last ice age and mixed woodland by the mid-Holocene, about 8,000 years ago. The name Weald, now used for a large area of Kent and Sussex, means forest, and derives from the Germanic root wald. Knepp Castle was built in the 12th century and has had a deer park since the 13th century. Medieval kings hunted here. In the 16th century, the Weald became a centre for iron making because it had both iron ore and timber. A large man-made lake at Knepp provided power for the hammers which crushed the iron ore. It's called the Hammer Pond. By 1806, Knepp Castle was a ruin, and Sir Charles Burrell, the 3rd Baronet and a long-serving MP, commissioned John Nash to design a country house in the castle style, with a park in the style of Humphrey Repton. Nash had been in partnership with Repton and had employed his son from 1796 to 1800. I recognised its style as Reptonian before learning that Nash was the designer. The rest of the land remained a patchwork of woodland and pasture until it was ploughed in the 2 World Wars. After 1945, much of the estate was used for dairy farming. Finding that their debts were mounting, even with generous agricultural subsidies, Knepp's owners decided to bring down the curtain on intensive agriculture in 2001. Waving goodbye to ploughing, haymaking, milking, fertilisers, 200 miles of fencing, pesticides, vets, and all the other trappings of high-tech agriculture, they let the estate grow wild. Profits rose to above average for British farms, and it became famous for what is now called rewilding. Wilding, without the re, is the title of the book in which Isabella Tree, who's married to the present Sir Charles Burrell, explains how and why the new policy was adopted. It's become known as rewilding, and the author uses both terms. Rewilding has the advantage of implying doing something rather than doing nothing. I see wilding without the re as the best term for the Knepp policy because it implies a direction rather than a destination. If aiming to restore the estate to a previous condition, which condition could one choose? 100 million years ago? Or 10,000, or 1,000, or 100 years ago? None of them are possible. But the term wilding can be used to describe a reduction in the level of land management. The result is a more natural approach, with less husbandry. The term rewilding was coined by an American conservationist. Dave Foreman wasn't a scientist and certainly wasn't a farmer. As a student, he'd majored in history. Foreman recalled that in 1990, I decided that it was wilderness restoration that we wanted, and I came up with the term rewilding to mean wilderness restoration. The techniques he proposed were summarized as the 3 C's: cores, corridors, and carnivores. The cores were areas of wilderness. Foreman also called the corridors wildways, and Knepp hopes to have links to nearby wilding projects and to the sea. I hope the idea is adopted and would like to see a landscape plan for creating them. The term rewilding is now used by conservation biologists and other scientists in America, Europe, and elsewhere. Frans Vera, who advised on the Knepp project, launched a large rewilding project in Holland. I first came across the term rewilding in connection with Knepp, but had been interested in the process and the possibility since 1970. After studying economics and philosophy as an undergraduate, I did a postgraduate course in landscape architecture in Edinburgh, and my first ever published words were in a letter to a newspaper in which I criticised the subsidy system for farming and forestry in upland Scotland. Visualising a hill bisected by a fence, I wrote about the stark absurdity of subsidising half the hill to plant trees and the other half of the hill to subsidise sheep grazing, which prevents trees from growing by natural regeneration. The subsidy system also neglected the benefits of agroforestry, mixed farming, soil conservation, scenic quality, healthy ecosystems, and public access to the countryside. Thinking about these issues again in 1998, I included chapters about the landscape of agriculture and the landscape of forestry in a book on landscape planning and environmental impact design. The book also has a chapter on public open space with a diagram on page 153 of a green web linking town and country. The web of greenways I advocated was mainly for human-related functions, such as recreation and transport. But the first item on the list of greenway functions, on page 154, was urban wilderness. Wimbledon Common in South London is a great example of this. It's wilder than other London parks, but is thoughtfully managed by a team of rangers. Half a century after 1970, the sheer craziness of subsidising forests and farms for contrary objectives persists, but is, I hope, on its last legs. With luck, it will succumb to the new agricultural policy of public money for public goods. I made a case for this in 1998 and was happy when, 30 years later, Michael Gove introduced it with a new Agriculture Act. Funding agriculture to achieve public goods became public policy in England. The name of the policy is the Environmental Land Management Scheme, abbreviated as ELMS or ELMS. The aims are sustainable farming, local nature recovery, and landscape recovery. In the chapter I published in 1998 on the landscape of agriculture, my wording was that public expenditure should be on public goods. So I wrote, Ecological, scenic and recreational assessments and plans are requisite, and the landscape planning principles for agriculture may be summarised as 1. Landscapes should be planned from different points of view, including those of landowners and of different sections of the public, as discussed in Chapter 1 of the book. 2. Public landscape planning should focus on public goods, especially recreation, scenic quality, and nature conservation, as discussed in Chapter 2 of the book. 3. Plans must be adjusted to contexts. This may require zoning plans and environmental impact design plans, as discussed in Chapter 3 of the book. In the summer of 2022, I spent 4 days on the Knepp estate and reached another 3 conclusions. First, it's a great project from which there's much to learn about regenerative agriculture, agroforestry, and landscape planning. Second, Knepp is well adjusted to the local context, but the way in which this has been done at Knepp probably won't apply to farms in different contexts. Third, the provision of public money for farms should not be based on old-style funding formulae like the Basic Payment Scheme. It should relate to the principles of the 2020 Agriculture Act and to context-sensitive farm and landscape management plans. This is best explained with regard to the history of agricultural support. In Britain, agricultural subsidies began with the 1947 Agriculture Act. Before that, farmers had to live with market trends, and there were cycles of boom and bust. The arrival of imports from America in the mid-19th century, for example, caused a long depression. Profits rose in the 2 world wars and fell when peace let imports flow freely again. The 1947 idea was that an assured market and guaranteed prices would be good for the balance of payments, and that homegrown food would be a strategic resource in case of another war. Subsidies did raise farm output and farm profits, and most farmers loved them. But they also raised food prices and caused serious environmental damage. In the 1960s, there was talk of reforming the system. But after Britain joined the European Common Market in 1973, the problems worsened. Agricultural practices intensified, even more habitats were destroyed, and too much low-quality food was produced, with the surpluses described as butter mountains, beef mountains, wine lakes, and milk lakes. The Brexit referendum of 2016 laid the ground for the 2020 Agriculture Act. Documents to further explain the Act have been published, but there is much uncertainty. I see this video as a contribution to the debate about the future of farming in the UK, using the Knepp estate as a case in point. So let's begin with the estate's history. At the start of the 21st century, Knepp's owners found that even with the lavish EU subsidy system, they were running into debt, as well as destroying wildlife, impoverishing the soil, aggravating flood problems, and polluting water supplies. In 2001, the owners sold their farm machinery, stopped using agricultural chemicals, stopped using vets, and let the farm go wild. The new policy was beneficial to wildlife, attracted large numbers of visitors, and put the estate back into profit. So could wilding be the future for Britain's agricultural landscape? Here, one needs to start with a global perspective of the strengths and weaknesses of UK agriculture. Britain is a high-wage, high-cost producer which imports most of its fuel, fertilizers, agrochemicals and machinery. These are disadvantages. But Britain also has compensating advantages. They include an excellent climate for plant growth, a long tradition of skilled farming, and short distances between farms and markets. Land holdings are large by European standards, but small by world standards. These give Britain an advantage in high price, high quality, niche production, and a corresponding disadvantage in low cost, low quality, mass production. Britain can't compete with America, Ukraine or Russia in low cost cereals, and can't compete with America or Argentina in producing low cost beef. But as the Duchy of Cornwall has shown, Britain can do well in producing luxury foods and specialist products, which are high quality, high price. This can be seen in the Knepp estate, which has, as wild as possible, cattle, deer, pigs and ponies. Productivity is relatively low, but the profit per carcass is a good deal higher than for industrially farmed meat. This is partly because the husbandry costs are low, and partly because they can sell produce directly to visitors. They're willing to pay premium prices for ultra-organic meat and oak logs for their wood-burning stoves. Noting this, the Country Landowners Association stated in 2021 that, with so few inputs, profits are significantly high. By selling to retail, revenues from Knepp's wild range meat are forecast to grow from £120,000 last year to £250,000 this year, and they're aiming for £500,000 in 2022. Most farm profits don't grow like this. Knepp also has a significant income from leisure, which is possible because of the wildlife interest and the scenic quality, and because Knepp is only 44 miles from London. As well as luxury food, there are wealthy visitors who can afford horse riding, glamping and yoga classes. The estate exemplifies an approach which could change London's metropolitan green belt into a metropolitan Knepp belt. Developers and their professional advisors argue that because greenbelt land provides few public goods, we might as well use it for building houses. Instead, and as recommended in another video, I believe we should develop the capability of the greenbelt to provide public and common goods, including natural capital, enhanced scenery, wild food, biodiversity and public access to the countryside. In 2002, Knepp received countryside stewardship funding to restore the Reptonian parkland near the house. And in 2010, it received higher level stewardship funding to install the deer fencing and gates which made the safari management possible, with cattle, deer and ponies roaming the estate at will. They also got public funding to rewild the River Adur. From a public benefit standpoint, all this was money well spent, though I'd be happier if permanent instead of permissive rights of way had been acquired. This would be public money for common goods. Based on her experience of intensive farming at Knepp and then a wilding strategy, Isabella Tree wrote that Britain has a chance to rethink. We need to consider removing farming and fisheries subsidies altogether. She believes that an independent-minded UK could lead the way in agricultural reform. It could charge farmers for pollution, just like any other industry, and reward them instead for environmental services provided for the public good. There are particular problems in Britain with dairy farms polluting rivers, arable farms polluting aquifers, and factory farms being built in places where industrial buildings would never get planning permission. So what can we learn from Knepp? I'll conclude with a set of propositions put forward as points for discussion. Finance. The Knepp approach to wilding is attractive to farmers and land agents because profits are high. It's also attractive to public bodies because it suggests a path to lower agricultural budgets and higher environmental benefits. Agricultural support for Knepp-type projects should be for capital projects rather than for revenue support. Location. Much of Knepp's success results from it being in an area which is beautiful, rich, near a great city and near the metropolitan green belt, which would benefit from its operating principles. There is scope for wilding in all parts of the British Isles, but it needs to be done in different ways in different places. National character areas, as defined by Natural England, and local landscape character areas are better planning units for agriculture than counties, parishes, or land use classifications. Food. Producing food will always be a central role for farms, but not all of the food needs to come from active husbandry. Finding and collecting wild food is as much a part of our ancient set of instincts as hunting. Environment. Dave Foreman emphasized the role of apex predators in wilderness landscapes and in rewilding projects. In managed landscapes, apex herbivores are also important. In conventionally farmed landscapes, humans are both the apex predators and the apex herbivores. To get the most from wilding projects, greenways, wildways, and other ways should be used as extenders. The resulting networks of patches and corridors can be called green webs, or, to use Foreman's term, landscape-level wildland networks. Foreman saw the rewilding projects in Britain as just ecological restoration, not as wilderness projects. Though the management of Knepp has been much wilder in the 21st century than it was in the 20th century, it relies on high gates and fences, which are not wilderness features. Landscape quality. Farmers often think and speak as though every square metre of farmland was equally beautiful. This may be so in their eyes, but in the eyes of the general public, it is not so. Humphrey Repton, a great landscape theorist who always wanted landscapes to be animated, would have loved the deer, longhorn cattle and people now seen on the Knepp estate. Farms used to be managed almost exclusively for the production of food. In future, farm landscapes should be planned and funded for the integration of private and public goods, including wild food, forestry, water management, ecosystem services, recreation, wildlife and scenery. This will require integrated landscape management plans, which should be the work of specialists coordinated by generalists, and should be for national landscape character areas, local landscape character areas, and individual farms. They should be diagrammatic at the broad scale and detailed at the detail scale. These can be called integrated landscape and agroforestry management plans. And I hope to discuss them in another video. Thank you.